A Range Rover Sport ought to deliver exactly what its name suggests, a luxurious Range Rover travelling experience with a dramatic extra dose of sporting capability. This second generation model delivers in both regards, frightening German luxury SUV rivals by matching them on tarmac while still obliterating them off-road. Continual enhancements to the lineup have brought fresh engine options and more sophisticated media connectivity as part of a series of improvements that have created the revised model we're going to look at here.
Here's a car that claims to be able to do, well, almost everything. It'll cruise on the Autobahn at 130 miles an hour, ford rivers in the Serengeti, take a family of 7 on holiday and slip you down to the shops. It can be affordable to run, rewarding to drive, and it looks dynamic and stylish. There has to be a catch, doesn't there? Time to check out the improved version of this second generation Range Rover Sport. Ah yes, the Range Rover Sport, a car that in its first generation, guys, was neither a Range Rover nor sporty. In fact, it was based almost entirely on the brand's sensible Discovery model, and thanks to that car's practical ladder frame chassis, it was about as dynamic to drive. Still, the smarter set of clothes did the trick, and for most of its life, between 2005 and 2012, the Sport was one of Solihull's best sellers. There were, it turned out, a vast number of potential buyers who liked the idea of a Range Rover, but who either couldn't afford one or wanted something a bit sportier. Something like this, in other words, the second generation model that Land Rover launched in 2013. This, at last, was a proper Range Rover product, with aluminium underpinnings borrowed from those of the fourth generation Range Rover introduced in 2012. That was engineering eagerly seized on by this model's development team in their quest to at last be able to offer a credibly sporting large SUV rival to cars like the Porsche Cayenne and the BMW X5. Those two competitors, of course, don't have to blend in unrivaled off-road excellence with their back-road blasting. They don't have to be automotive Swiss Army knives, all things to all people, in quite the same way. So, burdened with such expectations, how can this Range Rover Sport, indeed, how can any large Range Rover product, take them on at their own game? That, of course, is what we're here to find out. A task this second generation Range Rover Sport was aided in by a package of changes introduced in early 2017. Buyers of this revised model are being offered a more affordable entry-level point into the range, thanks to the availability of the well-regarded 2-litre Ingenium diesel unit, previously used only in the Range Rover Evoque. There's a fresh petrol option too, a 3-litre supercharged power plant that's borrowed from the Jaguar F-Type sports car. In addition, off-road capability is even further enhanced, courtesy of a new low-traction launch system. Plus, all models get a more sophisticated dose of Land Rover's InControl Touch Pro infotainment technology. Will this all be enough, though, to keep this contender's appeal strong in the face of toughening premium brand Teutonic competition? Well, time to find out. A Range Rover of any kind tends to fill you with certain expectations. It'll seat you higher up than anything in the segment, it'll lumber pleasantly about, it'll roll a little through the bends, and it'll storm its way through just about anything you can throw at it off-road. All of this, of course, is good enough for the Land Rover faithful, but it isn't an especially tempting proposition for the Teutonic brand buyers that Solihull urgently needs to satisfy for stronger sales. The first generation Range Rover Sport didn't tempt away enough of them, but the thinking was that this Mark II model might do better if it could be lighter, more agile and faster. If it really could be what designer Jerry McGovern calls the Porsche 911 of SUVs. The original first-generation version of this car had no chance of even considering such a demanding brief, mainly because it weighed nearly 3 tons. Not anymore, it doesn't, thanks to an exacting diet and primarily to an aluminium monocoque chassis that's borrowed from the fully-fledged Range Rover and then redeveloped for this model. A massive 420 kilos has been saved from the curb weight this time around. That's equivalent to a car full of adults, each carrying a hefty suitcase. Now, even if you didn't know this, even if you weren't expecting the enormous difference that ought to make, the feel you get at the wheel in what's called the command driving position anticipates a very different and far more involving driving experience than was ever delivered by this car's predecessor. The steering wheel is relatively compact, the seats are grippy, and the full-fat Range Rover model's ponderous rising circular gear selector is here replaced by a purposeful shard-like stick, which seems to have been borrowed from Jaguar's F-Type sports car. It controls the 8-speed ZF Auto paddle shift gearbox that all sport models must have, whether they be diesel, petrol or hybrid powered. That makes it sound like there's quite a choice, although the reality is that the vast majority of buyers will end up behind the wheel of the variant that we're trying here, the 306 bhp SD V6 diesel. This engine was revised back in 2015 with an extra 14 bhp and 100 Nm of torque added to make it feel even more instantly responsive to your right foot. It delivers 62 miles an hour from rest in a very acceptably rapid 7.2 seconds, en route to a theoretical maximum of 130 miles an hour. A lesser 240 bhp 2-litre SD4 4-cylinder diesel unit has been slotted into the range below this power plant, but unless you really need a touch of extra frugality, we'd stick with the SDV6 because the SD4 variant can't be ordered with the so-called dynamic driving aids that really make this model as much of a sports car as any hefty luxury SUV is ever likely to be. Whereas the original first-generation Range Rover Sport wouldn't even begin to keep up with a well-driven Porsche Cayenne or BMW X5 on a twisty country road, this Mark II version in dynamic spec can do just that, while at the same time embarrassing both of those two cars and everything else in the segment off-road thanks to its twin-speed low-range gearbox and its Auto Terrain Response 2 system. Now, I'm going to get to how those features work in a minute. Want a little more detail on the on-road dynamic spec stuff? We should probably give you that because this car will inevitably spend nearly all its life on tarmac. So let's start with cornering, traditionally the roly-poly downside of large SUV motoring. Not here it isn't. Adaptive Dynamics Variable Damping monitors vehicle movements up to 500 times a second and automatically tweaks the suspension to suit the way that you're driving and also the kind of road you're on. If that road's twisty, then you'll be glad of the Dynamic Response Active Lean Control system, which does exactly what it promises, and working independently on the front and rear axles to dramatically reduce body roll. It encourages you to press a little harder into tight corners and enjoy a torque vectoring system that works with what Land Rover calls a dynamic active rear locking differential to fire you from bend to bend. Both features combine through the turns to counter both understeer and wheel spin, with the electronics likely micro-braking whichever front wheel is threatening to lose grip. As a result, the car's kept more planted, more of the power gets transmitted to the tarmac, and you just feel more in control. Which is reassuring, especially if you happen to be at the wheel of one of the more powerful models, all of which come with a full suite of on- and off-road Range Rover Sport technology. There is a hybrid diesel model which mates the SD V6 engine with a 35 kilowatt electric motor to create an uprated 354 bhp output, and that is enough to improve the performance figures to 6.7 seconds and 140 miles an hour. If you want to go further, then the 339 bhp SD V8 diesel manages 62 miles an hour from rest in 6.9 seconds on the way to 135 mph. If you prefer petrol power, then two supercharged engines borrowed from Jaguar's F-Type sports car beckon. The 3-litre V6 option offers 340 bhp and makes 62 from rest in 6.2 seconds on the way to 130 miles an hour. If that's not fast enough, then the 5-litre V8 510 bhp model improves those figures to 5.3 seconds and 155 miles an hour, or 4.7 seconds and 162 miles an hour if you go for the top 550 bhp SVR flagship derivative. Now, the SVR version holds the SUV lap record at the Nürburgring Nordschleife. All these variants are models that will probably also see owners making good use of a further tarmac trick that this car has up its sleeve, its dynamic program. You'll find this on the Terrain Response 2 system that you activate via the circular dial down here by the gear stick. It's a one-shot setting that, when selected, instantly switches everything into red mist mode. So in one hit you get a sharper throttle response, more responsive steering, quicker gear changes, tighter body control and a firmer ride. It's brilliant. None of which would be especially praiseworthy if, like its rivals, Land Rover had compromised this car's off-road excellence in search of asphalt acceptability. But it hasn't, quite the opposite in fact, with this second generation model even better equipped to survive in the world than its predecessor was. These days, all Range Rover Sport variants come with a proper heavy-duty four-wheel drive system rather than the simpler torque-on-demand Torsen setup that the Velar model uses, and entry-level versions of this car used to offer as well. There's also Land Rover's acclaimed Terrain Response system, which in its most basic form offers a choice of 3 selectable settings to suit the ground that you're covering: grass, gravel, snow, sand or mud and ruts. And there's more. Every Range Rover Sport now gets the company's clever low traction launch system. And that's there to assist you when you're pulling away from a standstill on low grip surfaces such as mud, wet grass or snow. It works up to 90 miles an hour too, so it can also be used to negotiate slippery surfaces or inclines once the vehicle's moving. In addition, there are the usual Land Rover 4x4 tools, HAS, Hill Start Assist to get you up steep slopes, GRC, gradient release control to ease you over the summit, and HDC, hill descent control to get you down the other side. TSA, trailer stability assist, also comes as standard, which is useful since a high braked towing weight capability means that this car will often be hitched up. All variants bar the hybrid model can tug along up to 3.5 tonnes. Virtually all models also come with a lightweight air suspension setup that, in terms of wheel travel and articulation, betters any other SUV save the fully fledged Range Rover. The air springs can raise the car impressively high for really rough surfaces, which is why this model's 278mm maximum ground clearance figure is a massive 51mm more than the first generation version of this design could offer. Also, you can keep the raised off-road suspension setting active at quite high speeds, up to 50 miles an hour, which is a real boon when you're on terrain with long, rutted dirt roads. The increased ride height is an obvious advantage in water. It accounts for the enormous 850mm wading capability that you can monitor via an optional wade sensing feature that shows you the depth of the water you're driving through. A visual display and warning chimes alert the driver as the water level rises around the vehicle. And while we're talking about how high this car can get off the ground, we should also mention how that facilitates an impressive approach angle of 33 degrees that'll get you up those steep slopes. And once you've used the hill descent control to ease you down them again, you'll be glad of a useful departure angle of 31 degrees. The ramp angle is equally impressive, giving you up to 27.2 degrees. Now, all the figures I just mentioned will be slightly diminished if you go for either a hybrid or an SVR model. Providing you avoid the base SD4 engine, you'll get air suspension as standard, but bear in mind that if you don't avoid entry-level HSE trim, you will have to pay extra for the 3 key features that make up the off-road aspect of the dynamic specification that we were talking about earlier. First, and probably most significant, is the twin-speed gearbox. It'll give you a whole extra set of low-range ratios that you'll need if the going gets really sticky. Now, if that is the case, then you'll also want to make full use of the clever all-terrain progress control system. That's essentially a kind of low-speed cruise control that helps you maintain steady progress in extreme off-road conditions. And finally, there's the Terrain Response 2 package, which, as its name suggests, is an upgraded version of the Terrain Response setup I mentioned earlier. Now, it works in the same way, but it adds an extra rock crawl setting and, more importantly, a really useful auto mode, which analyses the conditions that you're driving in and then automatically selects the most suitable terrain program to cope. Imagine you were toned, fit and nearly 20% lighter. How would you look? Sharper? Smarter? Younger? This car certainly does in comparison to its boxy, heavy, first-generation pre-2013 predecessor. The faster windscreen angle, the streamlined profile and the sloping roofline make it properly sleek and contemporary, as it should be, a Range Rover Sport for the modern era, but recognisably a Range Rover Sport. The clamshell bonnet, the floating roof, the powerful wheel arches and the side fender vents that have always defined this model are all present and correct. Up close, the S in SUV is further emphasised here by the high beltline, the short overhangs and the distinctive silhouette. This contrast-coloured roof is optional on the lower spec models, but gives this car a little extra street-side presence, as do larger alloy wheel rims that can be anything up to 22 inches in size, as they are here. Go for one of the dynamic trim variants, and on most models you get these lovely red Brembo brake calipers. From here you get a perspective for the sheer size of this car. Now, some segment rivals are slightly longer, but there aren't many models in this class. Indeed, there aren't many cars on the road that are more than 2 metres wide and nearly 1.8 metres tall. You feel that width here at the front. Here, the slim xenon headlamps feature LED signature lighting, blending into sculpted corners that flank a classic 2-bar rearward sloping front grille, and that's executed to a theme reflected by the twin strokes of the distinctive fender vents. Lower down, a bold trapezoidal opening houses the central bumper beam and the skid plate, either side of which are front fog lamps that sit in lower corner panels that, on dynamic variants like this one, are trimmed in gloss black. Not a car to be trifled with then. A theme continued at the rear, where this high-set roof spoiler underlines sporting credentials that are further emphasised by this prominent lower panel that houses a potent-looking exhaust. Of course, as usual, what's more important is the stuff that you can't see. A modified version of the fully fledged Range Rover's aluminium monocoque chassis accounts for most of the 420 kilos that were trimmed from the curb weight of the original first-generation design. True, it's not enough to make this sport model a car that could be in any way described as lightweight in the luxury SUV segment. Still, the fact that it's these days not significantly heavier than rivals like Porsche's Cayenne and BMW's X5, cars that don't need to carry around such sophisticated, bulky, all-wheel drive hardware, has to be seen as quite an achievement. So, let's take a seat inside. Now, you'd be disappointed if you didn't have to climb up into a Range Rover. That's part of the appeal. Although older folk can ease the process by selecting the low-set access mode on variants that are fitted with air suspension. Once installed in these generously side-bolstered seats, though, there's no mistaking that you're at the wheel of this British institutional model's younger, slightly smaller and much sportier twin. The famous command driving position seats you a tad lower than you would be in a Range Rover, plus the more compact, thicker-rimmed wheel is smaller, the upright gear stick is more purposeful, and the centre console's higher. Perhaps that last point is the most significant one, because it positions the controls closer to you, creating a cocooning feel for the front seat occupants. Racy then, but still regal too. You're surrounded by simply acres of expensive materials, with perforated Oxford leather seats and deep piled carpet, complementing beautiful splashes of aluminium trim. The quality of the switches and controls isn't quite as good as German rivals, but build quality is predictably faultless, and we love the little touches, like the hydrophobic coating you get on the front side door glass that helps keep it clear of droplets. There's lots of in-cabin storage space. Take these 2 cup holders on the centre console, big enough to hold small bottles and able to be neatly covered by this sliding lid when they're not in use. The glove box and the centre cubby are also reasonably sized, but the door pockets are a bit small. There's plenty of high tech too, some of it more effectively presented than others. It's hard to dislike this 12.3-inch TFT instrument screen that offers lifelike digital facsimiles of the usual rev and speedo gauges. Now, this is just one of a range of customisable displays the panel can offer to suit your requirements. Off-road, for example, the rev counter can move aside in favour of a graphical drivetrain which shows which wheels are being driven, which diffs are locked, and much more. In fact, the virtual screen can be customized to show anything from the outside temperature to navigation information, telephone system settings, or wheel articulation. Less clear and intuitive are the buttons on the steering wheel, which control a range of electronic options in the instrument display. You'll need to spend some time with your nose buried in the instruction manual to figure out both these and the main infotainment system, a 10-inch In-Control Pro Center Dash touchscreen. Now this delivers the Solihull brand's latest media technology, and it offers smartphone-style pinch and swipe functionality. Unfortunately, though, the setup does without the kind of lower rotary controller that makes comparable Audi and BMW systems so easy to get to grips with. Instead, you have to jab away at the touchscreen if, like us, you find it difficult to get to grips with voice control. Still, once you do master the whole package, it's undeniably very impressive, not only dealing with the expected informational, telephone, climate and navigation functions, but also providing a high-quality DAB audio system and allowing access to Land Rover's suite of in-control connected car technologies. A little disappointingly, these don't enable you to connect in your smartphone via Apple CarPlay or Android Auto, but they do allow almost every other imaginable kind of media connectivity wish to be catered for. Your Range Rover Sport can be a Wi-Fi hotspot, of course, so you can Facebook your friends, you can catch up on the news and surf through your favourite apps. In addition, the car will learn your daily commute, it will picture your destinations and allow you to monitor and activate its functionality via your smartphone. Plus, there's a 4x4 eye display that shows you the state of play for everything from deactivating diff locks to driving into rivers. And we're always impressed by Jaguar Land Rover's optional dual view technology, which enables this monitor to simultaneously display a different image to the driver and the passenger. So at the wheel, you can, say, view the navigation display while your passenger watches a video. Very neat. OK, let's take a seat in the back. It's easier to get into this part of the car than was the case with the first generation version, thanks to this larger rear door aperture and the lower seating position. And once inside, you'll find that the significant increase in wheelbase designed into this second generation sport model brings two main advantages with it: more rear seat space and potentially more rear seats. Settle yourself into the rear, and if you're familiar with the fully fledged Range Rover, you'll find that a place in the back of this car is nearly as nice. The high mounted seats are firm and supportive. As a result, you'll be very comfortable on longer journeys, provided you're in the outer two pews. Predictably, the middle seat is considerably less comfortable. These seats can be optionally heated and cooled, and if you go for a variant fitted with this huge panoramic glass roof, the cabin gains a much airier feel back here too. The small door pockets will hold 1 litre bottles, and there are pockets in the seat backs. As an option, it is possible to order this car with what Land Rover calls 5+2 seating. In other words, an extra third row bench. Don't get your hopes up too high here though. The extra boot mounted chairs are really only for smaller children, and the space they reside in is much more restricted than would be the case in, say, a rival Mercedes GLS. Still, many key competitors in this segment don't offer any sort of third row seating option, and quite a number of family orientated Range Rover Sport buyers will be glad to have it. If you do have the 5+2 option fitted, you can also pay extra to have the middle row bench fitted out with tilting and sliding functionality. Finally, let's take a look in the boot. Now, if, like us, you think that any sort of large Range Rover should have a classic two-piece hatch, you might be disappointed to find that only a conventional tailgate is provided. Still, it is power-operated, and it can be activated by a wave of your foot beneath the bumper should you be approaching the car, key in pocket, laden down with bags. Now, this particular sports model hasn't been fitted with third row seating. No, actually I have to tell you that because there's absolutely no way you'd know that simply by glancing at the luggage area floor, under which the electrically raising extra chairs neatly reside when they're not in use. After all, the 784 litre cargo capacity is unaffected regardless of the seating configuration you choose. Not so impressive is the news that when they're retracted beneath the floor, that third row seating takes up space that would be normally used for a spare wheel like this. So buyers going for the 5+2 option will be stuck with a puncture repair kit. That's not an ideal scenario on a capable SUV. I mean, couldn't Land Rover's designers have situated the spare beneath the chassis as on the previous generation model? That aside, we're impressed by what's on offer here, although it is annoying on a car of this price that you have to pay extra for a ski hatch to push longer items through into the cabin. In terms of total capacity, you're talking around 100 litres more carriage space than you get in a rival Mercedes GLE and BMW X5 models, and a huge 226 litres more room than you get in the nearly as expensive Range Rover Velar. The X5 and the GLE turn the tables when the rear seats are folded down, but this sport model's 1,761 litre seats down total should be amply adequate for most. Range Rover Sport pricing is pitched in the £60,000 to £100,000 bracket, with the vast majority of buyers opting for the 3-litre SDV6 diesel we're trying here, which is priced from just under £65,000. In part, that's because this is the only engine available across all three of the main spec levels, which are HSE, HSE Dynamic, and as here, Autobiography Dynamic. Avoid entry-level trim, and you'll also find the same power plant mated to a 35-kilowatt electric motor in the hybrid diesel models, which sell at a premium of around £6,000 over their standard SDV6 counterparts. Of course, there are other engine options. At the foot of the range, HSE level buyers can make a £3,500 saving over the V6 diesel by opting for the more frugal 240 bhp 2-litre 4-cylinder Ingenium unit. Mid-range HSE Dynamic buyers with a £65,000 budget can get their Range Rover Sport fitted out with the 3-litre V6 supercharged petrol engine from Jaguar's F-Type sports car. And at top Autobiography Dynamic level, the venerable 4.4-litre SDV8 diesel from the Range Rover makes an appearance, although you'll need a budget of nearly £90,000 to get that. For that kind of money, you can get this car fitted out with an even more potent V8, a 510 bhp 5-litre petrol unit. That's another supercharged engine borrowed from the F-Type, and it's a power plant also available in an even more potent 550 bhp state of tune in the £98,000 flagship SVR model. Now, you might want some perspective as to where this kind of pricing positions this Range Rover Sport within the Land Rover lineup. So let's see. Now, first, it might be worth pointing out that some of the same power plants used in this model are also available in the 5th generation Land Rover Discovery, a car that's much more Range Rover-like these days, which has more third-row seating space and which would save you around £12,000 to £15,000 where direct engine comparisons can be made. The Discovery, though, does still remain a different kind of product. It's more likely, though, that potential customers will be tempted by other Range Rover branded products. If you're looking at lower order versions of this car, you might also want to consider the only slightly smaller and very stylish Range Rover Velar, which in 240 bhp diesel form will save you around £6,000 on an equivalent Range Rover Sport. If, on the other hand, you're considering more powerful and luxurious Range Rover Sport derivatives, you'll be more likely to be making comparisons with the fully fledged Range Rover, which sells mainly in the £80,000 to £100,000 bracket. Now, comparisons here are more difficult to make because of spec and engine differences between the two model lineups. The main Range Rover power plant, for example, is the older 258 bhp TDV6 3-litre diesel that the Range Rover Sport lineup no longer uses. But again, the two cars are really marketed at different kinds of buyers. But what about the way this car has been priced and spec'd against other brands in the luxury SUV market? So let's look at that using this volume SDV6 model as a benchmark. Now, the Range Rover Sport has always been positioned £10,000 to £12,000 above comparably powerful versions of models like BMW's X5, Mercedes GLE and Audi's Q7. And that policy seems to be continuing, reflecting, say, Land Rover, this model's slightly larger size and much greater off-road ability. As for other cars in this category that potential buyers might be considering, well, you could save a little more over a Range Rover Sport SDV6, say up to around £15,000 by choosing a comparable Volkswagen Touareg or Volvo XC90, and save a little less, say around £6,000, by opting for comparable diesel versions of the Porsche Cayenne or the Maserati Levante. Those who are looking at upper spec versions of this car may also be looking at the bigger Mercedes GLS SUV, although that is more of a competitor for the Range Rover. If, having looked at all these options, you decide that it is a Range Rover Sport that you really want, you're certainly going to need some guidance in choosing the right specification and options for your car. It's a process that can initially look quite complicated, so let's try and simplify it if we can. First, as you'd expect, all Range Rover Sport models feature an 8-speed automatic gearbox, and of course all variants get four-wheel drive. But don't take all-wheel traction for granted in this segment. With a rival BMW X5, for example, base models are only front-driven. And on that subject, it's also worth mentioning that these days the Range Rover Sport exclusively uses a proper heavy-duty four-wheel drive system rather than the simpler torque-on-demand Torsen setup that the Velar model uses and entry-level versions of this car used to offer. If you're tempted to save a bit of cash and opt for base HSE trim, we'd counsel you to think carefully first, because you'll have to do without quite a few of the tools that make this Range Rover Sport so good, both off-road and on it. For example, instead of the twin-speed low-range gearbox fitted further up the range, going for an HSE variant means you have to make do with a single-speed transfer box. With the 2-litre SD4 engine, coil springs replace air suspension too. Yes, with HSE trim you do get Land Rover's acclaimed terrain response system, but it doesn't come with the useful set and forget auto setting that features on the other variants. With an HSE model you'll also have to do without the Solihull brand's clever all-terrain progress control system. This is essentially a kind of low-speed cruise control that helps you maintain steady progress in extreme off-road conditions. Plus, the HSE derivatives also lack 3 on-road orientated features that come as standard further up the range. Torque vectoring to sharpen cornering, a dynamic response system to reduce body roll, and a dynamic program on the terrain response system that in one hit firms up the steering, sharpens the throttle response and quickens the gear shift times for press-on driving. It is true that the additional off-road elements I just mentioned can be added back into all HSE trimmed Range Rover Sport models via some extra cost packs, and if you go for an SDV6 model with the base level of trim, you can add in the extra on-road elements too. Still, once you've done all that, you might as well have bought into this car at least mid-range HSE dynamic spec in the first place. Now that's a plusher trim level that also gives you a bit of extra visual embellishment, courtesy of sports pedals and illuminated aluminium tread plates. Plus, the alloy wheels go up in size from 20 to 21 inches. Now, while we're on luxury embellishment, it's worth mentioning that all Range Rover Sport variants come with xenon headlights, keyless entry, a gesture-controlled powered tailgate, front fog lights, auto headlamps and wipers, power-folding mirrors, all-round parking sensors, heated windscreen, and, providing you avoid the hybrid models, a low traction launch system that will help you when you're pulling away on slippery surfaces. Inside, all models get full leather upholstery that's heated front and rear, plus there are 16-way power-adjustable front seats, a rear-view camera, cruise control, a 12.3-inch TFT instrument panel display with virtual dials, and an in-control Touch Pro centre dash 10-inch colour touchscreen. Now, from here you control navigation and an 8-speaker 250-watt DAB audio system. Plus, there's access to a whole range of Land Rover in-control services, including a selection of apps, a Wi-Fi hotspot, various remote features you can operate via your smartphone, and an in-control secure vehicle tracking system for stolen vehicle monitoring. Want to go further? Well, if you can afford to, then you'll want the autobiography dynamic spec that we're trying here. Now, this trim level, identifiable by its black contrast roof and even larger 22-inch 5 split-spoke wheels, also gives you a sliding panoramic glass roof, a 360-degree park distance control system, and automatic high beam assist headlamps that dip themselves at night in the face of oncoming traffic. Inside at this level, there's climate-controlled 18-way adjustable front seats, adaptive cruise control, 3-zone climate control, configurable mood lighting, front centre console cooler compartment, a heated steering wheel and an even more capable 19-speaker 825-watt Meridian surround sound audio system. On to extra cost options. All the autobiography dynamic features I just mentioned can be added into lesser variants at extra cost. Plus you might also want to look at a range of other luxury options. This particular car, for example, has lots of them. Adaptive xenon headlamps that turn with the corners, a park assist setup to steer you into spaces, a soft door close feature, privacy glass with an infrared reflective windscreen and timed climate control so you can set their cabin to be toasty warm when you climb aboard in the morning. Inside, it has 20-way adjustable electric front seats with a massage function, a head-up display, climate-controlled seats in the rear as well as the front, and a surround camera system with 5 digital cameras providing an almost complete 360-degree view of the outside of the car. It also has Land Rover's rear seat entertainment package, complete with 10-inch screens. Plus, the brand's clever dual-view touchscreen has been fitted up front, and this allows different things to be viewed simultaneously. So, for example, the front passenger can watch a DVD while the driver views a sat-nav. And here we've also got the top Meridian reference sound system. That's a thumping 1700-watt 23-speaker 3D setup. If you don't want to go further, you can add in a TV too. What's missing on this model, though, is perhaps the most significant extra cost feature you could add to a Range Rover Sport, the powerlifting so-called 5+2 third-row seating that you can have for around £1,500 more, providing you haven't chosen a 4-cylinder or a V8 diesel variant. For buyers needing those extra chairs, this optional will give this car an advantage over rivals like BMW's X5, Mercedes GLE, Porsche's Cayenne and Maserati's Levante, large SUVs that can't offer this feature. Go for the 5+2 seating option and you'll have the chance to pay extra for a further option which will see the second row seating fitted out with tilting and sliding functionality. Plus you can also add in a ski hatch so that longer items can be pushed through from the boot. As for aesthetics, well, some owners will want to consider the very expensive metallic gloss, satin matte or pearlescent special effect paint finishes, and more affordably you can have a contrast coloured roof finished in black, grey or silver. Avoid entry-level trim and you can also specify an optional stealth pack that gives elements of the exterior a gloss black finish. There's a range of alloy wheel styles with rims varying in size from 19 to 22 inches, and you can get carbon fibre trim for the mirror covers, the tailgate, the side vent blades, the bonnet louvers, the front grille and the fog lamp bezels. Inside you can add polished veneers in dark grey oak, Zebrano, polished black or carbon fibre, plus there's a choice of luxury headliners. 3 or 4 zone climate control systems are also available. On to practicalities. Many owners will want the electrically deployable tow bar to be fitted, and if you specify this, your dealer will also want to tell you about the advanced tow assist technology that you can have that'll help when you're hitched up and trying to park a trailer. Now with this setup, images from a rear-facing camera are relayed to the central touchscreen and the driver can manoeuvre using the Terrain Response 2 system's rotary controller. The advanced tow assist system will then autonomously steer the trailer into place. All the driver has to do is to operate the accelerator and the brake pedals. Now if you do have a tow bar fitted, you'll also be able to specify a cycle carrier that can carry up to 4 bikes. As for other practical extra cost stuff, well, you might want a full-size spare wheel to replace the reduced section spare that comes as standard, or at least it usually does anyway. As mentioned elsewhere in this film, you can't have any sort of spare wheel if you specify third row seating. Fixed and deployable side steps are available, along with mud flaps, roof rails and crossbars, and a roof box, plus roof carriers for things like skis, snowboards and kayaks. Load space rails for the cargo bay would be useful, as would a load space retention net, a collapsible luggage space organiser and a load space liner tray. Now, if you couldn't stretch to the rear seat entertainment system, iPad holders that clip onto the back of the front seat head restraints, they would be useful to to keep the kids quiet. We'd also like the cooler warmer box that fits into the rear seat armrest, and the unique wade sensing feature that provides depth information when you're driving through water. On to safety, and we'll start with the standard features. Now, Land Rover has got with the programme in recent years, and they've added autonomous emergency braking into all Range Rover Sport models. Now, this is one of those setups that scans the road ahead as you drive, looking for potential accident hazards. If one's detected, you'll be warned. If you don't respond, or you aren't able to, perhaps, the brakes will automatically be applied to decrease the severity of any resulting accident. Lane departure warning also comes as standard, as does an in-control protect feature in the infotainment system that will automatically alert the emergency services as to your exact location if the airbags ever go off. Other standard safety features may be more familiar to you. Things like ISOFIX child seat fastenings, a pedestrian-friendly bonnet, tyre pressure monitoring, brake lights that flash in an emergency stop, and a whole bouncy castle quota of airbags. More specifically, as well as airbags for both front seat occupants, you get side curtain and thorax airbags, and an extended curtain airbag that covers passengers right into the optional third row seating. Hopefully, of course, you'll never need any of this, but to try and ensure that the worst never happens, there's a whole raft of electronic assistance features. On road, as well as the usual anti-lock brakes with EBA, emergency brake assist. These include DSC, dynamic stability control, ETC, electronic traction control, EDC, engine drag torque control, CBC, corner brake control, RSC, roll stability control, and if you need it, TSA, trailer stability assist. Off-road, you're more likely to use HAS, hill start assist to get you up steep slopes, GRC, gradient release control to ease you over the summit, and HDC, hill descent control to help you down the other side. Want to go further? Well, of course, that is possible if you have more to spend. Top Autobiography, Dynamic and SVR models get the Drive Pack, and that's optional on the other models. Here you get 5 key features: traffic sign recognition, pictures road signs as you pass them and displays them on the dash, an intelligent speed limiter, notes speed signs that you pass, and if it's set, won't let you exceed that speed. A driver condition monitor checks out your responses as you drive and flashes up warnings to stop if it detects drowsiness. Reverse traffic detection warns you of approaching vehicles if you're reversing out of a space, and a blind spot monitor works on the move to stop you from dangerously pulling out to overtake in front of a vehicle that's in your blind spot. A further Drive Pro pack includes all those features, along with adaptive cruise control and lane keep assist to gently steer you back into lane if you drift out of it. The Range Rover Sport has come a long way since the days of the heavy, thirsty old first-generation model. In developing this second-generation design, the Land Rover engineers changed things fundamentally in a bid to vastly improve efficiency. At its launch in 2013, this was the first vehicle in its segment to feature an all-aluminium body structure, and this, along with features like a plastic tailgate, made a big difference. Curb weight fell by a whopping 39%, to the point where, in fact, this Mark II model Range Rover Sport doesn't actually weigh in much more than a rival BMW X5 or Mercedes GLE. And those, remember, are SUVs that aren't built with the same kind of strength and don't have to carry around heavy 4x4 engineering items, the twin-speed low-range transport box, for example. Efforts to make the bodywork more slippery help the efficiency cause too. Things like aerodynamic underfloor panelling and active vanes that blank off the front grille for better aerodynamics when cooling airflow isn't required. Plus, electric power steering was introduced, along with smart regenerative charging to reclaim energy that would otherwise be lost under braking or when cruising. Quite a roster of improvements, and there's more. Stuck in traffic? Well, your Range Rover Sport will sense that. There's a transmission idle control setup that disengages 70% of drive when the vehicle's stationary with drive selected, and that gearbox will, in cold conditions, automatically choose a lower gear to more quickly get the engine up to its most efficient operating temperature. As you'd expect, there's also a stop-start system to cut the engine when you're waiting at the lights or sitting in a queue. CO2. The EU6 units on offer in the lineup use variable exhaust valve timing and selective catalytic reduction for extra cleanliness. And as with most modern diesels, there's an AdBlue after treatment system that sprays an aqueous urea solution into the exhaust system, and that neutralizes harmful gases like nitrogen oxide. So, how much of a difference does all that make? Well, let's try and put it in perspective. And let's use this volume 306 bhp SDV6 model as an example. Now, the original pre-2013 version of this car weighed 2,583 kilos. This one weighs 2,184 kilos. That original version returned 32.1 mpg on the combined cycle. This one manages 40.4 mpg. So you get the idea. As for the CO2 emissions that'll determine your VED tax payments figure, well, they've improved from 243 grams per kilometre to 185 grams per kilometre. If you stretch to the hybrid model that mates this SDV6 engine to an electric motor, those figures improve to 45.6 mpg and 164 grams per kilometre. Now, you might gather from those figures that the diesel-electric hybrid variant doesn't feature trendy plug-in technology that you'll find in its German rivals. All well and good, but as Land Rover well knows, those rivals can significantly better the figures of any V6 diesel-powered Range Rover Sport almost without breaking sweat, which is why the brand decided to introduce its smaller 4-cylinder, 2-litre, 240 bhp SD4 diesel unit at the foot of the Range Rover Sport lineup for the 2017 model year. Now, interestingly, the readings of this entry-level variant, 45.6 mpg and 164 grams per kilometre of CO2, exactly replicate those of the hybrid model. Of course, you'll get nothing like that from the top SDV8 diesel. Here, the figures are 33.6 mpg and 219 grams per kilometre. Thinking about petrol power in this car? Well, then you will need deep pockets, with both the supercharged units on offer likely to boost your quota of Tiger tokens. The 3-litre V6 manages 26.9 mpg and 243 grams per kilometre, while both 5-litre V8 variants deliver 22.1 mpg and 298 grams per kilometre. Those are figures that we think you'd achieve with a very frugal driving style indeed. Of course, the driver will need to play his or her part in pursuit of cleanliness and frugality, keeping an eye on the eco data part of the infotainment screen. Now, here you get various screen options. There's one that shows you the impact on fuel of various electrical items, and another with so-called eco tips that are supposed to improve your frugality. Although some of these, to be frank, are they're a bit blindingly obvious. Things like make smooth use of the accelerator and maintain a constant speed. Most useful is the driving style display that marks your driving efficiency from 1 to 5 in 3 areas: acceleration, speed and engine, and braking. It'll also help that the routing software for the InControl Touch Pro navigation system can propose an economical route option to minimise fuel consumption. What else? Well, insurance. The 4-cylinder SD4 diesel variant is rated Group 44E. This SDV6 diesel is rated Group 45E, with the hybrid, the 3-litre V6 supercharged petrol and SDV8 diesel versions up at Group 47E. The 5-litre petrol V8 model is rated at Group 50E. As for depreciation, well, you'll be expecting that to be significant. It always is with any luxury SUV. Those models in greatest demand, of course, shed less of their value. And this Range Rover Sport remains in great demand on the used market, hence strong retained values for mainstream models. They vary between 52 and 54% of the original purchase price after a typical 3-year ownership period. Now, choose this top autobiography dynamic spec, and that figure will drop to around 49%, while the SDV8 and the 3-litre petrol versions are down at 47%. The top 5-litre petrol SVR retains 44%. As a result, leasing rates for this Range Rover aren't as high as the list figure asking prices might lead you to believe. Even the green lobby feels more kindly towards this model these days, and that wasn't always true. After all, in 2005, Greenpeace activists chained themselves to vehicles on the Solihull production line in protest. They shouldn't bother to do that now. Such have been the eco efforts made with this Mark II design. Up to 75% of the aluminium, much of it is fashioned from, is sourced from recycled content. And high-spec versions apparently use up to 26.7 kilos of recycled plastics, which will divert over 11,800 tonnes of plastic from landfill during this car's lifetime. Those are useful stats to have if you come across disapproving green-bearded folk. A 3-year unlimited mileage warranty comes with this model, with further extensions available if you want them. There's also an In Control Protect service that allows you to monitor vital stats on your car from your smartphone, and which will guide the breakdown services to your Range Rover Sport should it ever have a problem. Also included is European cover and a promise to get you on your way as soon as possible in your own car or in a loaned vehicle if the required repair will take longer than 4 hours. As for maintenance, well, your costs here will be at a different level from what you'd pay to look after a similarly priced luxury saloon, particularly when it comes to tyres and brakes, so budget accordingly. Service intervals are every year or every 16,000 miles, whichever comes first. If you want to budget ahead for that, an optional advanced service plan pack will cover all maintenance for 5 years or 50,000 miles. With the fully fledged Range Rover being these days very much a plutocratic purchase, it's this sport model that for us now most faithfully continues a model line stretching all the way back to the 1970 original. That very first Range Rover was a car you didn't have to be afraid to use as intended, on or off-road. Nor is this one, usefully improved in this revised second generation form. Get the fundamental thing right with any great design, in this case the weight, and everything else tends to fall into place. The aluminium platform that here makes this car so relatively light solves at a stroke the two issues that blighted the first generation Range Rover Sport: stodgy handling and prohibitive running costs. And it leaves room for proper four-wheel drive hardware to be fitted without compromising paved road prowess, which is something that German rivals could learn from. True, it's a pity that the entry trim level does without some of the key on and off-road features, and also that it's necessary for potential customers to pay significantly more than they would for some less sophisticated rivals, especially if they want to buy in at the SDV6 level that probably shows this model at its best. Still, the right version of this car offers exactly the right kind of luxury SUV experience for those who are fortunate enough to be able to enjoy it. And it delivers a Range Rover Sport that is in almost every respect a proper Range Rover. I mean, be honest, you'd like one, wouldn't you?